What will actually make employees stay and grow with your business in 2026? This week, we're joined by Tash Pieterse, Certified People Leadership Coach, to unpack one of the key findings from the 2026 Employment Market Report. Career opportunities now rank higher than salary and bonuses as a retention factor in New Zealand. While pay remains important, of course, employees are increasingly looking at the full employee experience when deciding whether to stay, move, or explore new opportunities. Also on today's show, we look at some positive news. So we're looking at which areas are seeing an increase in job numbers this year in New Zealand. And lastly, if you're looking to hire quality talent fast, again, we have another three new top candidates who are ready to look for work across New Zealand. Hello everybody and welcome to Mahi Matters, New Zealand's employment market update. I'm Shannon Barlow, Managing Director of Frog Recruitment, and we've got some great insights for you today. So, as I said previously, salary and bonuses have been overtaken by career opportunities as the key reason that employees choose to stay. In Frog Recruitment's 2026 Employment Market Report, it was revealed that only 57% of employees rated salary and bonuses as a key retention factor, compared with 73% who prioritised career opportunities. Now, that's a clear signal that while pay still matters, it is no longer enough on its own to keep people engaged, committed, or looking long term. For employers, this raises an important question. Are businesses still relying too heavily on salary as their main retention tool, while underestimating the bigger picture of what employees now expect from work? To discuss this further, we're joined today by Tash Pieterse, Certified People Leadership Coach. Now, to start off, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work as a Certified People Leadership Coach?
Yeah, so my background is actually in human resources. So I worked in HR, studied it, worked across a range of different industries, from core government to professional services. And I did that for about 13 years before I went out on my own and started my own HR consultancy and coaching practice. And over the last 7 years, I've been working with organizations and leaders to effectively build better leaders. So helping them to build environments where people can be successful, where they want to stay. And essentially my line is become a leader people actually want to follow. So, actually connects quite well with what you're talking about today. What makes people stay, and money just isn't enough anymore. So a lot of what I do is professional development, leadership development programs, and also one-on-one coaching to help build those leadership skills and help leaders to be able to create environments where people can thrive and be successful.
Excellent. Well, I can see why we've got you on the show today. Now, that result from our 2026 Employment Market Report, I'm sure that will come as a bit of a surprise to many, where we found that career opportunities actually ranked higher than salary and bonuses as a retention factor. To set the scene, what do you think that tells us about how employee expectations are changing in New Zealand?
Yeah, it's such an interesting one because I think it's easy to fall back to salary. And I think companies just look at that because it's black and white, right? It's easy to give salary. It's easy to focus on that, where career opportunities, career development, it's a bit more nuanced. It's a bit more individual, and it's not a one size fits all on how to connect people and progress people in their work. And I think there's two sides to this. Number one, I think career progression, career development has always actually been a higher factor to salary. It's just often salary is sometimes easier to get depending on how well your negotiation tactics are. But as humans, innately, we want to be challenged. We want to grow. We want to be useful, right? We want to stretch our skills and we want to be more capable and we want to build that capability. And so I think innately people are wanting to look for the next step, the next opportunity. How can I get further than where I am? And as soon as organizations don't show the possibility of that, or even what a pathway would look like for people, they're going to want to look elsewhere. And so, or if those opportunities aren't there, then people will fall back to salary. It's like, okay, well, if I'm not going to be able to get my next step, then okay, maybe can I just get more money for what I'm doing, especially if opportunities aren't necessarily available otherwise. But I think in the last couple of years, this might also be shifting with the rise of AI, where people are actually wanting to see how can I become more useful, because people are worried about AI taking over their jobs and all of those things. Or, a lot of people are looking at ways they can use AI to even be better at their jobs. And so I think that's also pushing people to look at, well, what opportunities can there be? And they're looking for organizations that are creating opportunities as well, that they're not falling behind and being reactive to what's happening. So I think over the next 6 to 12 months, companies are really going to need to think about this. How are we going to, not compel, but how are we going to retain our talent? How can we create opportunities where people can continue to be useful, continue to leverage their skills and expand their skills, rather than just being able to throw money at them and who knows what the economy is going to look like. So your companies are going to need to be more creative with career opportunities, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can look at it in a positive way. So we've found some of these cycles. So, immediately or through the COVID years, it was things like obviously job security was really important, and people were just happy to have kept or to keep working through and to do everything they can to support themselves and the business. So they weren't looking at that bigger picture. But as things improved, then we started to see a big rise in things like longer term opportunities, training and development, and career opportunities as a whole. So it seems like we're back in that peak of the cycle again, where we're taking a broader view. Um, Now, one of the things that you mentioned there was, again, looking at that bigger picture and not just the how much am I getting for what I'm doing at work, which of course is still important. How do you think work life balance is shaping the decisions employees make about whether to stay, move, or even consider a new opportunity?
Yeah, I don't know if is it changing a lot from what it has been over the last couple of years. I mean, you mentioned COVID. COVID was the prime example that remote and hybrid working does work. We went through a period where it's like, well, we had to, so we made it work. And in a lot of ways, a lot of companies saw, a lot of progression. They saw a lot, increased engagement, increased satisfaction, all of those things. And then we went through the period where, companies are now clawing that back, and they're like, everyone's returning back to the office 5 days a week, everything like that. And we saw, on social media, there was a huge, articles, media, everything about how it caused a great, exit, really, because people were like, I don't want to work for a company where I have to go back to an office 5 days a week, because I don't have to. We've been showing that it's been working for the last 2 to 3 years. And so I think, with that, I think with the evidence that remote working, hybrid working can work, I think people are more likely to look for opportunities that allow that, and again, use that as a leverage, as a negotiation tactic. And I think that's also where organizations can use it as part of their employee value proposition. Like, how do we utilize work-life balance? How do we speak about it? And I'm not saying every organization has to, and I'm not saying every organization necessarily can, but it's about being really strategic about how you use it. Like, if you have the ability to offer it, how can you leverage it as a way to make the organization more appealing, and also use it as a leverage point that sits outside of salary? Because, I, for one, absolutely am someone that I would choose flexibility over time and hours over money. That to me is more important, because I've got a young family, because I don't live in the center city. So there's all these other factors that I need to think about that, looking at work-life balance would solve, or at least help. And so I think there's again, maybe two sides to that, where there are people that absolutely want to go back to the office. They want to be in that environment, have that culture. But then there are also people where it just doesn't work as easily. And so where can So they're looking for opportunities where they can utilize that for their benefit. And then also organizations need to look at, well, how can we use that as a way to attract great talent and also retain great talent? Because just like career opportunities, work-life balance, is really important. And I think it's even more important now with, just how stressful life is becoming. The cost of living is increasing. So people are wanting to, work from home more to save money, all of those things. So like, how can organizations think about that as part of their bigger employee strategy, not just, again, we need people and bums on seats. Like, again, thinking about the intention behind that and what kind of culture are you wanting to build within your organization.
Yeah, I think there's some really good points there. So, you mentioned about not just thinking narrowly and throwing more money at a problem. And I think that, and you said about thinking strategically, well, that is one way that you can achieve both, because as you said, with cost of living pressures, it seems like the ongoing cost of living crisis, we've been talking about that for literally years. And now with obviously fuel costs in the mix as well. That can be a way that can ease the pressure on individuals, but doesn't affect the business's bottom line at the same time. So it's a kind of a can be a good solution to that. But I think as well, so you've talked about looking at that bigger picture, or looking at the organization as a whole, and am I getting what I need from my workplace? um, it's a good way to think of, are they actually thinking about different solutions and what's going to work for different workers within the business, and what adjustments that they can make so that I'm more engaged and I'm more productive, and happy in work, and will stay there and keep working for them. So yeah, some interesting points there. Now, when employees say that they want more career opportunities, what are they actually looking for in practice? And how can leaders create that sense of progression, even when sometimes a promotion may not be immediately available?
Mm. So I think what they're really looking for is the possibility of more, or the next thing. So, even if promotion may not be on the table right now, what do they have available to them to, again, extend that skill set? They're looking for potential. Like, what's the potential here for me for the next, 12 to 18 months? If I can't step, say, into a senior role or into a manager role, or even just, maybe a more specialized role, then what work is available to me to test, to challenge myself, to test my skill set, to build a new skill set altogether? So what they're looking for is to feel challenged, right? Like, we want to feel challenged. We want to feel like we're doing something more than just the mundane BAU boring stuff. Not to say everyone is like that. There are people that just want to show up, do the job, and go home. Absolutely fine. But then there are the people that they're looking for that next stretch. They've gotten to the end of where they can go. And, for a lot of people, they don't necessarily want to leave the organization, especially if they're working in an organization where they love the people, they do enjoy, the purpose or maybe the strategy that the business is focused on. And so they want to look at what can be available to them. And if there aren't promotions, or say it's their maybe turnover is low, so there aren't the availability of positions, as available, then what it takes for leaders is knowing your people individually. So who are your people? What are their goals? Where do they see themselves? What particular skills do they want to develop? Even if it's, again, even if you can't offer another job, what skill sets are they wanting to develop? And then, are there projects or pieces of work that you can give them to enable them to work on that? So, or are there things that you're maybe holding on to as the manager or the leader that could actually be a great upskilling project for someone in your team that maybe you need to work on letting go of to be able to provide an opportunity? And then what could that enable you to do? And, you know, it's having those ongoing conversations, understanding what the career ladder looks like for each of your people. And then what does the plan look like? Can you offer them something that can keep them engaged, that can keep them satisfied? If not, what could a succession plan look like for them, even if it means they might need to move on. And I think the best leaders are the leaders that are happy for their people to move on because there's nothing else here for them. Because then they can become boomerang employees where they can go get what they need where it's available and then come back and, bring that new learned skill set. And again, like I will preface this doesn't mean give your people more work to do and like potentially burn them out, but it's looking at how can you play with their role? How can you play with the work that they do to give them that feeling of progression, that notion of progression, even if you can't give it in terms of, role title or things like that. And, this is the harder side of it because it's easy just to be like, sorry, we don't have a job, or, or maybe just throw a little bit of more money or, whatever it might be. This takes intention and time and effort to get to know your people, have these conversations and get creative around what you have available and be creative on how you want to retain and increase the engagement and satisfaction of your team. Because that inevitably is going to make your team more successful if you can increase those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Now you talked about how important creating those opportunities for learning and skill development are. Why do you think that development is so important? And you did mention a few things here, but how can employers make it really meaningful rather than, as you say, just adding on more work or it's a tick box? Yes, I've provided this.
Yeah, again, I think it's really knowing individually what your people want to develop in. Is I think it's easy to go, oh yeah, this is the training and development plan for this role. Yes, so that's important. Like we have, the development maps for each role and what it would take to help them, to when that role is ready to upskill to the next role. But inside of that is individually what skill sets and capabilities do these people have that are working in those roles, and then where do they want to develop those skill sets? Because even though they might have a role that they're doing right now, doesn't mean that they may necessarily want the exact level up from that role. So I think about the HR, that's kind of my reference points. Like an HR advisor may not necessarily want to become a senior HR advisor. They might want to become a remuneration and benefits specialist. So what would it take for them to be able to develop that skill set, whether that role is available or not? How can you work with them individually to create a training and development plan that would help them gain those skills that when that role might become available, they have the ability to step into it, or maybe they want to move somewhere else and where that role is available, where they can step into it. So when training and development is individualized, it's personalized, it's focused on where the person actually wants to go, as well as what the role needs, people are more willing to really buy into that. For example, with leadership coaching, I work with so many people who are overwhelmed, burning out because they weren't given leadership training. And it's literally as simple as organizations going, who are our leaders, our potential leaders that we can identify, and how can we give them development early? How can we upskill them now before they step into those roles so that they're already set up for success when they get into that role? When people feel that level of attention and recognition, they're more willing and they're more wanting to buy into that learning and development, which then helps them be more engaged, which then gives you the return on investment of that development. I think where organizations, when organizations say, oh, we do all this training, but we don't really get an ROI, it's like, well, how targeted is your training really? Are you just throwing training out there to say that you've got training or to be an organization that has training? Or is your training actually purposeful? Is it individualized for where people actually want to grow and develop, and also where you need people to go as well within those roles? So that's always what has been meaningful to me. Like I worked in organizations when I was an employee that had lots of training and development on offer, but it was just so generalized. And I'm like, like none of this really applies to me or appeals to me. But the best managers that I've worked with, they were the ones that sat down with me and said, like, what are the skills that you have? What are the skills that you want to develop? What does this look like for the role? And then what does that plan look like? And I think that's always where you're going to get the most out of people, when you just give a bit more of that attention and care, rather than, again, just like the blanket rule for everyone.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's many who have experienced when it's a good practice of that, and when, as you say, can become a bit of a tick box both for the employers but also for the employees as well. Okay, I have to do this thing. It's not really benefiting me, but it's part of the job. So which kind of, as you say, defeats the purpose of that. And lastly,
And sorry, I
sorry,
just
go
wanted
for
to
it.
add there as well. Like, I think now is an amazing time for organizations to think about how they can step up in this area with the rise of AI. There's a lot of ways that AI can be so beneficial to an organization. Why not, like, get people to be involved with that? Like, what are the people that are interested in that? How can you develop and upskill them so that they're more engaged in using those things, and then, help them to bring that into their roles, so that, again, it's not creating this fear element to this, thing that's coming or that's here. But again, how can you bring those two things together? And I think that also comes down to people want to be useful, and people are trying to find more ways to be useful. And so how can you leverage that desire and that drive as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So key. Um, And lastly, so we talked about there's a real danger for employers who are focusing too heavily on one particular area. So in this case, we're talking about pay, but it might be, we run the same question in our market report each year to see what's important, and we do see some quite big shifts in what's important. And sometimes businesses are really reactive to that. So they'll go, oh, okay, learning and development's a thing, or flexibility's a thing. Let's put everything in place for that one thing. And then, of course, the market changes and there's a new priority the next year. So, yeah, I guess how can you help organizations to be able to take that into account and influence whether people stay with them, and take all the factors that are likely to come through into account?
Mm. Well, I mean, number one is, like, know what is important to your people. So make sure that you're doing meaningful engagement surveys and actually acting on the information and data that you get. Number two would be, as a baseline, pay competitive market rates and pay, like, equal pay, right? So that people aren't second guessing, am I getting paid the same as so and so? Am I getting underpaid? So, as an employer, make a commitment to do equal pay, fair pay as well, so that isn't the number one driver to why people are wanting to leave. They see another job and it's like, why is that job paying me 20K more for the exact same thing I'm doing over here? Then that becomes a quick driver.
Mhm.
So that would be like my number one, is pay fairly, pay equal. And then number two is engagement surveys. Like, get information, make sure that year on year you're actually finding out what is important to your people, because it does shift and change. And then, to make it even more nuanced, it's the individuals are also going to find things that are different depending on their life stages, right? People who are starting a young family, flexibility will maybe rank a little bit higher, or maybe they'll rank exactly the same as pay. It's like, oh, our expenses are now increasing because we've got one person at home, one person's working, and I want flexibility so I can spend more time at home. So how can you benefit the people? How can you give individualized benefits to the people who need them? And I think pay is the easy fix because it's black and white. Like I said at the beginning, it's easy to go, yeah, let's just give another pay rise, let's just give another thing.
It's not
But
always that
again,
easy.
no, that's true. It's probably getting harder and harder for that now anyway. But I think often pay is the quick negotiation tactic of, like,
Mhm.
oh, someone's thinking about leaving, let's just see if we can, like, offer them a bit more money. But, well, right now for this person, what is important to them? So, and I know that can often feel hard, because and I've worked with organizations where it's like, yeah, but we don't want to have all these different things for all these different people. And, we don't want to have, anyone feel like anyone's getting better benefits or, things like that. It's like you can have standardization around what is available, but then you can also create flexibility about how people utilize it and how it's applied to them. So there can absolutely be standard ways and standard benefits of what you provide, but then there can just be some flexibility on, well, how can people utilize this for themselves? Whereas, some people might want to buy more leave and have more leave available to them, whereas someone might want that in their salary package, or someone might want to have more flexibility with work hours and something else. And then this other person might want, I don't know, some more training and development budget, or I don't know, whatever it is. So like there are different ways that organizations can play with this if they choose to see that there is possibility with it. I think sometimes we just get caught up in this is how it's always been done, this is what it is, versus, well, how can we make this benefit our organization, our employees demographic, what they want to need, and make it really work for that environment. And again, it comes back to like, it's knowing your people, what works for your people that works for you, because not every organization has the same people that work for them and, have the same drive and all of those things. So like really understanding, what your demographic is, what your people are saying, what your people are wanting, and then finding meaningful ways to try and make that work. Again, you're not going to make everyone happy. You're not going to give everyone what they want all of the time. But if you can find the majority that will work, then you're in a better space than being like, oh, we're going to put all of our money into this one thing, but for 2/3 of the organization, they don't really care about that thing. So it's like, then what's the point? Right. So again, it's knowing what your people are saying, what your people are wanting, and then strategic thinking, right? And then going, okay, well, how can we best utilize that information to drive decisions and drive better outcomes?
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for all that insight. Of course, Tasha's details are on the broadcast there, so you'll be able to get in touch if some of that's resonated with you or started. I'm sure it would have at least got you started thinking about things and perhaps how you can do things a little better and help your chances of retention. Thanks again for coming on board today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
Excellent. Now, where the jobs are, signs of demand in 2026, and what can feel like a pretty heavy stream of economic and employment news lately, here's something a bit more positive. So, Seek has just released the most in demand jobs for 2026, and it's a strong reminder that while the market is tighter, demand hasn't disappeared, it's just become more focused. The list is led by roles in healthcare, trades, construction, and engineering, areas that continue to face structural skill shortages. And I think this year, usually when you go through an economic downturn, there's some winners and losers in there. This one has been a little bit different, where basically it was tough times across the board for lots of different industries. So it's good to see things like construction and engineering, particularly, starting to see that boost in improvement. So we're also seeing strong demand in education and logistics, which reflects ongoing investment in infrastructure and essential services. But what's particularly relevant to what we do at Frog is the continued demand across business support, accounting and finance, and HR roles, the backbone functions that keep organizations running and enable growth. And as we heard last week, with ongoing employment law changes and payroll complexity, HR and payroll professionals are becoming even more critical to help businesses navigate compliance and keep everything running smoothly. And here's a key signal of where the market is heading. So, we're starting to see an uptick in sales and business development roles. And that's always one of the earliest indicators of a turning market. When businesses begin hiring salespeople, it tells you that they're no longer just focused on cost control, that they're looking to win work, grow revenue, and move forward. So while it might not feel like a booming job market just yet, this data really reinforces what we've been saying, that there is opportunity out there, particularly for candidates with in-demand skills or those aligned to growth areas. It also highlights the importance of being strategic. Not every sector is moving at the same pace, but if you know where demand is building, you can position yourself ahead of the curve, because even in a slower market, the right skills are always in demand. And right now, we're starting to see exactly where those pockets of opportunity are forming. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you again for joining us. And as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. If there's a topic you'd like us to explore, or even if you're interested in being a guest in the show, make ssure to get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Mā te wā, see you next time.